A brave nun named Sister Junia arrived at the request of Father Andrew to exorcise a dangerous demon. The demon had possessed a young boy named Hee-Joon, and Father Andrew was unable to expel it. The demon's influence on Hee-Joon was so strong that when the father attempted an exorcism, the boy attacked and injured him. At that moment, Sister Junia brought holy water and without hesitation poured it all over Hee-Joon. As soon as the holy water touched his body, the demon inside him began to feel a burning sensation and screamed in pain. Meanwhile, Father Andrew tried to restrain Hee-Joon, while Sister Junia started praying. After some time, Hee-Joon calmed down, but Sister Junia realized that the purification was not complete. She quickly took out a special bone used in sacred rituals and placed it in Hee-Joon's mouth. Suddenly, the demon weakened for a moment, and Hee-Joon collapsed unconscious. Following this, Sister Junia admitted Hee-Joon to the church hospital, where a doctor named Paul began his treatment. Dr. Paul believed that this was not a case of demonic possession, but rather a mental illness that could be treated with medication and therapy. However, Sister Junia disagreed. She was certain that if the demon remained inside Hee-Joon for too long, it could cost him his life. She sought permission from the church's main priest to perform another purification, but she was not allowed to proceed without approval. Sister Junia realized that waiting would mean turning a blind eye to Hee-Joon's possible death. Meanwhile, Father Andrew, considering himself a failure, decided to leave the church. And before deciding to devote all her attention to teaching, Sister Junia handed over a file related to Hee-Joon. The file stated that Hee-Joon had previously attempted suicide, but the demon residing within him was so powerful that it didn't let him die. The next day, Sister Junia started feeling unwell and had to visit the hospital, where she was diagnosed with a severe illness. She was told that she didn't have much time left. However, instead of worrying about herself, she began thinking only about Hee-Joon. She wanted to eliminate the demon before her death. But now another major problem arises. Dr. Paul refused to allow her to take the boy. He believed that Hee-Joon needed scientific medicine, not spiritual rituals. According to his research, Hee-Joon had been a victim of bullying at school since childhood, and his condition might be a result of psychological trauma. Meanwhile, Hee-Joon's mother received a call at the hospital. She had already taken on a lot of debt for her son's treatment, and now the lenders were threatening her to return the money. On the call, she was humiliated, and her son was also insulted. Hearing all this, she mentally broke down. Slowly, she looked towards the cross hanging on the wall, picked up a sharp object, and inflicted wounds on herself. Then, without hesitation, she stepped towards the window and jumped. As soon as this happened, a nurse who was Sister Junia's colleague rushed to call Dr. Paul. By the time they reached the ground, Hee-Joon's mother had already taken her last breath. The hospital staff immediately sent her body to the morgue. Sister Junia, who was witnessing everything, began to pray for Hee-Joon's mother's soul. But at that moment, she sensed that an evil force had its eyes set on Hee-Joon, who was admitted to the hospital. When she looked closely, she noticed that her assistant, Sister Mikaela, was also staring in the same direction, as if she too could feel an invisible presence. In the evening, after finishing their work, Yunia requested Mikaela to accompany her to Hee-Joon's mother's funeral rites. After the funeral was completed, Yunia shared her suspicion with Mikaela. She felt that the two of them had similar abilities. Yunia could hear demonic voices, while Mikaela could see them with her own eyes. Mikaela had chosen to become a nurse at the church hospital because she wanted to control this unwanted supernatural ability. Yunia then revealed her true motive to Mikaela. Since Mikaela was Dr. Paul's assistant, had easy access to the hospital, no one would suspect her if she helped Hee-Joon escape. Yunia warned that if they didn't act soon, Hee-Joon's death was certain. Mikaela was disturbed by this thought. She had always considered her ability a curse because her mother had given birth to her while under the influence of a demonic entity. Society saw her as an unlucky child, and from a young age, she had suffered from mental distress due to her ability to see ghosts. Nightmares and waking up suddenly at night had become a part of her life. After much thought, Mikaela decided to help Yunia. She didn't want Hee-Joon to go through the same suffering she had endured. The next day, Mikaela secretly helped Hee-Joon escape from the hospital, and Yunia took him to a shaman who was an expert in controlling this demon. A beach was chosen, and while reciting prayers, she began her special ritual. Mikaela and Yunia took Hee-Joon near the water. As soon as a rooster was sacrificed, the ritual gained momentum. At that moment, Hee-Joon, crying, pleaded with Zoya to stop the ritual, but Junia did not budge. Hybe continued praying. Suddenly, Hee-Joon became silent, and in the next moment, his voice changed. It was as if someone else was speaking through him. As soon as Hybe performed the exorcism, strong winds started blowing, and the atmosphere, a strange tremor was felt. Hybe realized that this was no ordinary demon. The ritual was unsuccessful, and Junia was left with no choice but to take Hee-Joon back to the hospital. When Dr. Paul learned about the incident, he scolded Mikaela. But more than the scolding, Mikaela was worried that the ritual remained incomplete. That same night, while she was tending to a patient at the hospital, she suddenly sensed that something was wrong. When she held the patient's hands, she saw that their palms had turned black. Panicked, she rushed to the patient's room, only to find that they were no longer alive. Meanwhile, Junia's health had deteriorated further. Due to cancer, her body could no longer endure much. Just then, a terrified Mikaela arrived at her house and revealed that Dr. Paul had decided to send Hee-Joon to a hermitage. Hearing this, Mikaela became restless. She had a bad feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Without wasting any time, the two grabbed their car and set off toward the hermitage. On the way, Yunia filled a gallon with holy water, preparing for any evil that might come their way. When they reached the hermitage, they saw that Hee-Joon was sitting alone inside an old church. As soon as he saw them, a strange smile appeared on his face. He began predicting the fate of each of them one by one. Suddenly, Dr. Paul seemed to fall under the control of an invisible force and started strangling himself. Junia quickly mixed her blood with holy water by cutting her hand and began reciting prayers. But then she noticed that the cross hanging above Hee-Joon's head started shaking as if someone was trying to make it fall. There was a fear that the cross might fall and injure Hee-Joon, so Junia rushed toward him. Just then, Hee-Joon's eyes turned completely black. He was entirely under the demon's control. The next moment, he threw Junia to the ground and started strangling her. Seeing this, Mikaela immediately grabbed the holy water and sprinkled it all over Hee-Joon, weakening the demon's influence for a short time. Hee-Joon regained some consciousness and pleaded with Junia to help him. He didn't want to die. He wanted to live a normal life. Junia knew that it was impossible to defeat the demon alone, so she decided to seek the help of a priest. However, when the priest heard her request, he said that he could only provide some religious equipment but was not capable of performing the ritual himself. With no other options left, Junia went back to a high-ranking monk for help, but he refused, saying he was too busy. Now Junia and Mikaela had no choice but to face the spirit on their own. They secretly took Hee-Joon out of the hospital and brought him to an abandoned factory. There they tied his hands and feet to prevent him from causing harm during the exorcism ritual. Junia placed a piece of holy cotton on Hee-Joon's forehead, and the very next moment, the cotton turned black. It was clear that the demon was still inside Hee-Joon. Then she sprinkled specific salt around him to ensure the demon couldn't escape. Just then, Dr. Paul arrived and admitted that Junia was Hee-Joon's last hope. The ritual began. Mikaela started praying in one corner, while Junia placed a mirror in front of Hee-Joon. Within moments, Hee-Joon regained consciousness, but there was a strange unease on his face. Junia immediately placed a cross on his chest, while Mikaela continued to pray. Hee-Joon screamed in pain, his body convulsing violently, and then suddenly he passed out. Mikaela relit the ritual candles, but at that moment, the demons started mocking their efforts by uttering bizarre words. Junia intensified the ritual to suppress the demon further, causing Hee-Joon's body to shake even more, and suddenly the entire house trembled. She sprinkled holy water on him again, but this time it had no effect. The entity laughed and taunted Junia, calling her powers weak. Then she remembered that if a demon's true name was discovered, it could be banished forever. However, despite all efforts, the demon refused to reveal its name. Instead, it mocked Junia, saying she could never become a mother and that her death was near due to cancer. But Junia was not one to give up. She ridiculed the demonic entity, saying, "You only prey on innocent children. Your strength works only against the weak. You are nothing more than a petty, cowardly demon." After that, she placed the cross on June's chest and began praying with all her strength. This time, the ritual's effect was even more powerful. June suddenly started rising into the air, as if an invisible force was pulling him. But this demon was very strong, and Junia's powers were still unable to completely subdue it. Just then, Junia heard the sound of prayers. She saw that it was an assistant of Hybe, who had been sent to help with the ritual. As soon as the sound of the ritual spread, the demon began to wail. Yunia picked up a cylinder and struck it hard against the window, allowing the outside sounds to rush in more forcefully. Then she picked up some sea salt with her hand and touched a little to her lips, increasing her energy. She started praying with all her might against the demon, while Yunia poured the remaining holy water on June. A dark shadow emerged over June's head, resisting fiercely and refusing to reveal its name. Finally, Yunia resorted to her last measure. She placed the cross inside June's mouth to exert more pressure on the demon, but still, it did not yield. Yunia then came up with another tactic. She threatened to bind the demon to her own body. Yunia had decided that to completely destroy the demon, she would have to perish along with it. With this resolution, both Yunia and the demon were engulfed in flames, vanishing together from this world. And with that, the story came to an end. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Also subscribe to this channel for more horror stories like this.